Natalie Anders hadn't planned on standing in front of 22nd graders that Monday morning, especially not in a classroom that smelled like crayons, anxiety, and pencil shavings. "Miss Anders, do we still have math today?" one of the kids Grayson asked, his big hazel eyes blinking up at her like she held the fate of his entire world in her hands. "Yes, Grayson," she said with a forced smile, tucking a strand of her brown hair behind her ear. "But I promise I'll try to make it less painful than usual." The other kids giggled. That helped. Natalie was a substitute teacher, not by dream but by necessity. She'd only planned to fill in for a week while Mrs. Cartwright recovered from pneumonia. It was supposed to be simple: show up, pass out worksheets, survive sugar-rushed lunchtimes, and leave. But nothing about what happened next would be simple, because that morning, the classroom door opened, and in walked a man who looked like he belonged on the cover of a magazine, not inside an elementary school. "Sorry I'm late," the man said, stepping inside the room with a confident calm that silenced even the rowdiest kids. He was tall, with close-shaved dark hair and a sharp jawline, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal coat over a black turtleneck. His presence didn't just command the room, it owned it. Grayson jumped out of his seat. "Dad!" Natalie's eyes widened. "Dad?" The man walked over and placed a hand on Grayson's shoulder. "I promised I'd drop off your science project. You left it in the car." Grayson beamed. "Thanks, Dad." The man finally looked at her, and when their eyes met, Natalie felt her heart trip over itself. "I'm Sawyer Zane," he said smoothly, reaching out a hand. "Grayson's father." Natalie blinked, trying to keep her cool as she shook his hand. "Natalie Anders. I'm subbing for Mrs. Cartwright." His grip was warm, firm, and way too distracting. Sawyer gave a small nod. "Nice to meet you, Miss Anders. Grayson's told me a lot about his class. I hope he's behaving." "He's great," Natalie said quickly, painfully aware of how underdressed she was in her thrift store cardigan and scuffed boots. "Very curious." Sawyer chuckled. "He gets that from his mother." There was a pause. Natalie wasn't sure if that meant his wife was still in the picture or not, but she didn't ask. Not her business. He handed the project to his son and leaned down. "Be good, G." "Okay, Dad." As Sawyer turned to leave, he looked at her one last time. "It was nice meeting you, Miss Anders." "You too," she said, though her voice was barely above a whisper. And just like that, he was gone. Natalie spent the rest of the day trying not to think about him. But that was impossible. The man didn't just walk into her classroom, he walked straight into her brain and set up camp. That evening, she stayed late to clean up the mess of glitter and glue sticks the kids had left behind. She was wiping down desks when the door creaked open again. She turned, startled, to see Sawyer standing there. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said, holding a small white paper bag. "Grayson asked me to bring you these." He walked over and handed her the bag. Inside were 2 chocolate chip cookies. Natalie blinked. "He asked you to bring me cookies?" Sawyer nodded. "He said you were nice, and he thought you'd had a long day." Natalie laughed. "He's not wrong." Their eyes met again, and this time, the silence felt different, softer. "Can I ask you something?" Sawyer said suddenly. "Sure." "Why are you really here?" he asked, eyes narrowing slightly. "You don't look like you belong in a second-grade classroom." Natalie crossed her arms. "What does that mean?" "It means you look like you're meant to be somewhere bigger. I don't know. A courtroom or a newsroom. Not gluing macaroni to paper." She tilted her head. "You don't know anything about me." "True," he said. "But I'm good at reading people." Natalie wasn't sure whether to be flattered or insulted. "Well, for the record, I'm subbing because I needed the money. And the only thing I'm good at reading right now is second-grade handwriting." Sawyer smiled, and for a moment he looked impressed. "Well," he said, "thank you for looking after my son." "You're welcome." He paused as if debating something. "There's a charity auction Friday night. School fundraiser. You going?" "I wasn't invited." I just invited you. Natalie blinked. You're going. I'm one of the sponsors. Of course he was. I don't own anything fancy, she said, half joking. I'll send a dress, he said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Her jaw dropped. Wait, what? I'll have my assistant drop it off. Consider it a thank you for not quitting halfway through your first day. I can't accept that. You didn't say no, he said, already walking toward the door again. Sawyer, he turned around. Wear the dress, Natalie. I'll see you Friday. And just like that, he was gone again. Natalie stared at the empty doorway, heart pounding. What just happened? On Friday evening, the dress arrived in a black garment bag, delivered by a woman in a sleek black SUV. Natalie opened it and gasped. The dress was deep navy satin, fitted with thin straps and a subtle slit. The tag read a price she didn't even know stores were allowed to print. She almost didn't wear it, but something in her wanted to see him again. So she did. When she stepped into the school gym turned ballroom, transformed with fairy lights, white tablecloths, and a string quartet, heads turned. But only one pair of eyes made her stop breathing. Sawyer stood at the other end of the room in a tailored black tux, his eyes locked on her like she was the only person in the building. He walked over without hesitation. You wore it, he said, his voice low. You sent it, she replied. You look stunning. Thank you, she said, cheeks warming. He offered his arm. Dance with me? I thought this was a fundraiser. We can fundraise later. She took his arm. And in the middle of a crowded school gym, under glittering lights and next to a table of PTA moms selling raffle tickets, Natalie danced with the billionaire dad who'd walked into her classroom and turned her world upside down. And in that moment, nothing else existed. You're dancing like you've done this before, Sawyer murmured, his hand confidently at the small of Natalie's back as they moved in time with the music. Elementary school dances don't usually involve string quartets, she replied, trying not to focus on how warm his touch was through the thin satin of her dress. But I've had a little practice. He leaned in slightly. That's so? I was prom queen, she said, as casually as she could manage. He chuckled. I believe that. The music slowed to a finish, and the hum of conversation filled the room once more. Natalie stepped back, suddenly too aware of where they were and how many eyes had been on them. Parents, teachers, board members. Some of them looked curious, others surprised. I should probably find the raffle coordinator, she said, glancing toward the far end of the gym. You're not on faculty, Sawyer said, watching her carefully. You don't have to work the event. I know. She smoothed her hands down the sides of her dress. But I can't just stand around in a donated gown pretending like I belong here. You do, he said, his voice even. More than half the people in this room. She raised a brow. And what makes you the authority on that? I've been to enough of these to know who's here for the cause and who's here for the cameras. She glanced around. I don't see any cameras. You'd be surprised. Before she could respond, a woman with silver earrings and a clipboard approached. Sawyer, they're asking for you at the auction table. Something about the silent bid sheets. I'll be there in a moment, he said, not taking his eyes off Natalie. The woman hesitated for only a second before walking away. Natalie folded her arms. You're not just a sponsor, are you? His lips curved slightly. I'm on the board. Grayson School is one of the few things I take seriously. That's unexpected. Why? You don't exactly give off PTA dad energy. He stepped closer. What kind of energy do I give off? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. He let the moment linger, then finally said, meet me out front in 10 minutes. What? I'll have my driver bring the car around. I want to show you something. She blinked. You're asking me to leave a school fundraiser to go. Where? You'll see. His tone was calm but firm. She looked at him warily. Is this how you always do things? Say something vague and expect people to follow. Only when I know they want to. Before she could argue, he turned and walked toward the auction table, already being pulled into a conversation with two suited men and a woman in a velvet blazer. Natalie stood there for a moment, trying to decide if she was insane for even considering it. But something about the way he looked at her made saying no feel impossible. 10 minutes later, she stepped outside into the cool evening air. The parking lot was quiet, most guests still inside. A sleek black car with tinted windows waited at the curb, engine humming softly. The driver stepped out and opened the rear door. Inside, Sawyer was waiting. She hesitated only a second before climbing in. The interior was warm, the scent of leather and something expensive she couldn't name filling her senses. "Where are we going?" she asked as the door closed behind her. He looked over. "Somewhere quieter." She gave him a look. "That's not an answer." "I own a gallery downtown," he said. "It's closed tonight." "A gallery?" "I collect pieces. Mostly modern, some rare commissions. I thought you might like it." She studied him. "Why me?" He didn't hesitate. "Because you see more than most people." She paused. "You got all that from one classroom visit?" "I got more from one dance." They drove in silence after that, the city lights flickering past the windows. Natalie tried not to be impressed by the way the car glided through traffic or the quiet efficiency of the driver. But it was hard. The gallery was in a converted warehouse in the heart of downtown, its entrance marked only by a brass door and a single spotlight above it. Inside, the space was cavernous and dimly lit, the walls adorned with striking canvases, some angry, some tender, all powerful. Sawyer led her through the space with a quiet reverence, stopping in front of a large oil painting of a woman sitting on a rooftop, her hair blowing in the wind, her expression unreadable. "This one's my favorite," he said. She studied it. "Why?" He didn't answer right away. "Because she looks like she's deciding whether to jump or just keep sitting there." Natalie turned to him, surprised. "That's dark. It's honest." She stepped closer to the painting. "She looks like she's waiting for someone." He glanced at her. "You see more than most people." She didn't respond. She was too busy staring at the painting, feeling something twist in her chest. The woman in the painting looked like someone who'd been strong for too long. Sawyer's voice was quieter when he spoke again. "I bought this place after Grayson's mother passed." Natalie turned to look at him. There was no bravado now. No calm control. Just a man with a story he didn't tell often. "She was sick for a long time," he continued. "By the time we got the diagnosis, it was already too late. Grayson was only 4. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He nodded once. "I didn't know what to do with all the noise in my head. So I bought this building and filled it with things that made me feel something." Natalie looked around at the paintings, the sculptures tucked into shadowed corners, the way the lighting made everything seem more alive than it should be. "I never would have guessed," she said. "That's why I brought you," he said. "You don't guess. You listen." She didn't know what to say to that. After a moment, he added, "You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to see it." She turned slowly toward him. "Why me, Sawyer?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because you're not trying to be anyone else. You're not impressed by the car or the clothes. You didn't flinch when I said I'd send you a dress. You're not playing a part." She swallowed hard. "And what part are you playing?" He stepped closer. "None. Not with you." Her heart hammered in her chest. "I should get back," she said finally. "I'm still responsible for closing up the classroom. I'll have the driver take you." She nodded, not trusting herself to say more. He walked her back to the car in silence, opened the door for her himself. As she slid into the seat, he leaned down, his voice low. "I meant what I said. You belong in bigger places." She met his gaze. "Maybe, but sometimes the smallest places are where you're needed most." He closed the door, and the car pulled away. Natalie stared out the window, her thoughts a blur. She didn't know what scared her more, that a billionaire had just peeled back a part of his soul for her, or how much of hers she'd accidentally let him see in return. Natalie's Monday morning began with a paper airplane hitting her shoulder mid-roll call. She turned, expecting a sheepish grin from one of the usual suspects. But instead it was Grayson sitting with his hands folded neatly on his desk, giving her a look that could only be described as conspiratorial. She arched an eyebrow, picked up the airplane, and unfolded it. Inside, in surprisingly neat handwriting, were 2 words, "You're invited." She glanced back at him. He mouthed the words, "My house." The bell rang, but she didn't move right away. Something about that note tugged at the part of her that had been replaying Friday night on loop, the gallery, the weight behind Sawyer's silence, the way her name had sounded in his voice. During recess, while the other kids ran shrieking across the playground, Natalie crouched beside Grayson at the jungle gym. "Your note," she said. "What's that about?" He looked around, then whispered, "Dad said I could invite you over for dinner." She blinked. "He did?" Grayson nodded, arms crossed. "He said if you came, he'd make pasta. Real pasta. Not the kind from a box." Natalie took a moment to process that. "You really want me to come?" "He never cooks for anyone," Grayson said. "Not even Annalise. And he likes cooking. He just doesn't do it. So if he's doing it for you, it means he wants you there." She should have said no. She was the substitute teacher, not a friend of the family, not someone who should be stepping over the threshold of a student's mansion for homemade pasta. But the truth was, she wanted to go. And that scared her more than she wanted to admit. "All right," she said. One dinner. That evening, she found herself standing in front of a gate taller than her apartment building. A uniformed man buzzed her in and directed her up a winding drive lined with trimmed hedges and white lanterns that flickered to life as the sun dipped below the horizon. The house, or rather, the estate, was an architectural marvel in glass and stone, but not the cold kind of modern. Warm gold light spilled from the windows, and music floated faintly from somewhere inside. She rang the bell. It barely had time to echo before the door opened. Sawyer stood there in dark jeans and a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked nothing like the controlled man from the fundraiser or the polished father from the classroom. He looked relaxed, which made it all the more dangerous. "You came," he said. "I did say I would. You usually do what you say?" "I try to. Don't you?" He stepped aside to let her in. "Only when it matters." The foyer opened into a living space that somehow managed to feel both cavernous and lived in. A fireplace flickered beneath a painting of a stormy coastline, and the scent of garlic and fresh herbs drifted from the open kitchen. "Grayson's upstairs with his tutor," Sawyer said as he led her toward the kitchen. "He has a spelling test tomorrow." She followed him, trying not to let the floor-to-ceiling windows and custom lighting make her feel like she'd stepped into a lifestyle magazine spread. "Does he always have a tutor on school nights?" "Only twice a week. He likes it. Gives him structure." She leaned against the counter, watching as he stirred a pot on the stove. "You really are cooking. I told you I would. I'll admit, I didn't expect that." He set down the spoon and turned to face her. "What did you expect? A personal chef. Maybe a perfectly plated meal in a dining room with too many forks." He gave a quiet laugh. "Sorry to disappoint. You haven't yet." That hung in the air longer than she meant it to. He looked at her for a moment, then reached into a cabinet and pulled out 2 plates. "I was hoping to have you here alone," he said. "Talk, without music or crowds or people watching." She tilted her head. "Why?" "Because I've been thinking about you more than I should, and I don't like guessing." She blinked. "Guessing what?" "What kind of woman you are." "I'm not sure one dinner's going to answer that." "Maybe not," he said, scooping pasta onto her plate. "But it's a start." They ate in the kitchen, at a small marble table tucked beneath a pendant light. He poured her wine, not the kind poured to impress, but something he clearly liked himself. The pasta was rich, the sauce deeply flavorful with hints of basil and something peppery she couldn't quite place. "This is incredible," she said after a few bites. "My mother's recipe," he said. "She used to make it when things were hard." Natalie looked up. "Things get hard for people like your family?" "They used to. Before the money. Before the company." "What do you actually do?" she asked. besides show up in classrooms with science projects and buy art galleries? He leaned back slightly, swirling his wine. I built a data management firm when I was 25. Sold it 3 years later for 8 figures. Took the money, invested in biotech. More acquisitions. More sales. Now I consult and fund startups I believe in. She blinked. That's a lot. It was survival. Then it became legacy. And now it's habit. She picked up her glass. And Grayson? Where does he fit into that? He's the only thing that makes any of it matter. There was no performative pride in his voice. Just truth. She nodded slowly. He's a good kid. He is. He needs people who see him for who he is. Not for what his last name means. And you think I'm one of those people? I know you are. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't demand to be filled. Then he said, "What about you? What did you want before all this? Before standing in for a sick teacher?" "I wanted to be a writer. I majored in journalism. Thought I'd end up in investigative reporting. But life has a way of rerouting things." "What happened?" "My dad got sick. I moved back to take care of him. After he passed, I needed something steady. Teaching came up. It wasn't the plan, but it was a paycheck." He studied her. "You still write?" "Not lately." "Why not?" She hesitated. "Because I'm afraid I won't be good anymore." "That maybe I never was." He reached across the table, his hand brushing hers. "You should write again." She looked at him, surprised by the intensity in his voice. "You don't know me well enough to say that. I know enough to see when someone's hiding behind something they don't love." Before she could respond, footsteps echoed on the stairs. Grayson appeared in the doorway, barefoot, holding a stack of flashcards. "I passed all 20, he declared. Sawyer stood, pulled out a small glass jar from a shelf, and handed it to his son. "Then you've earned your reward." Grayson peeked inside. "Chocolate coins. Imported," Sawyer said. "Only the best for spelling champions." Grayson beamed, then turned to Natalie. "Are you staying for dessert?" "I think I should get going," she said. "It's a school night." Grayson's face fell slightly, but he nodded. "Okay, but maybe next time." She smiled. "Maybe." Once Grayson retreated upstairs again, Sawyer walked her to the door. The night air was cool, the sky scattered with faint stars. He didn't say anything as they walked. At the threshold, she turned. "Thank you. For dinner. For trusting me with your story." He looked at her with something unreadable in his eyes. "I meant what I said, Natalie. You don't belong in the back of a classroom. You belong somewhere your voice carries. And what if I'm not ready for that?" His voice was soft. "Then I'll wait until you are." She left before she could say anything reckless. But as the gate closed behind her and the city swallowed her up again, she realized she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. And she wasn't sure she wanted to. Natalie didn't see Sawyer the entire week that followed the dinner. Not at drop-off. Not at pickup. Not even a glimpse of his car idling at the curb. Grayson came to class each day with a cheerful wave and a backpack full of meticulously packed lunches. But when Natalie asked how his dad was, his answers stayed vague. "Busy today," he'd say. Or, "Working on something important." And each time, something in her chest tightened a little more. She tried not to read into it. Maybe he was traveling. Maybe a business deal had pulled him away. Maybe the dinner had meant more to her than it had to him. That last thought cut deeper than she expected, which only made her more determined to push it aside. But on Friday afternoon, just as she was erasing the math problems from the board and preparing for the weekend, the intercom crackled. "Miss Anders, there's a delivery for you at the front office." A few of the kids oohed, as if she were a celebrity getting fan mail. She gave a quick, embarrassed shrug. "All right. Everyone pack up and remember your reading logs." When she reached the office, the secretary handed her a flat black envelope sealed in wax. Inside was a single card, thick as velvet and handwritten in stark ink. "Meet me tonight. 8 o'clock. Bring what you wrote." There was no name, no address, But she didn't need one. Only 2 people knew she used to write. And only one of them had a driver who appeared outside her apartment at exactly 7:45 with a knowing nod. The car took her past the city's edge, into a wooded stretch she'd never noticed before. Eventually, it pulled up to a stone path lit by low lanterns, leading to a glass-walled structure nestled beneath a canopy of trees. It wasn't a house, exactly. It was smaller, more intimate, but still breathtaking. The driver opened her door without a word. She stepped out, heart hammering, notebook clutched tightly in her hand. Sawyer was already waiting near the entrance, dressed in a black sweater and dark slacks, sleeves pushed up, collar open. He looked different, not tired, but heavier somehow, like he'd been carrying something all week and had finally decided to put it down. "You came," he said. "You asked," she replied. He looked down at the leather-bound notebook in her hand. "You brought it," she nodded. He held the door open for her. "Come on. It's warmer inside." The interior was a single open-room fireplace at the far end, towering bookshelves on each wall, and a grand piano set off to one side. The space was peaceful but not still. It felt intentional, like everything inside had been placed there by someone who valued meaning over display. She looked around slowly. "What is this place?" "My mother's cabin," he said. "We used to come here when I was a kid. I restored it after Grayson was born. It's where I go when I need to clear my head." She turned to him. "And you brought me here because..." He stepped closer. "Because I can't stop thinking about you. And I don't want to." The words landed so quietly, so completely, that it took her a moment to breathe. "Sawyer, I know what you're going to say," he interrupted. "You think this is temporary, that I'm just chasing something because it's unfamiliar. But that's not what this is. I've built my life around control, around minimizing risk." "But you..." He shook his head, his voice roughening. "You walked into my son's classroom and dismantled everything I thought I understood about what I wanted." She didn't move. "You disappeared this week. I had to settle a deal in Zurich. I didn't tell you because I knew I'd want to see you before I left, and I couldn't afford that kind of distraction with what was on the line." She frowned. "You think I'm a distraction? I think you're the first person who makes me want to stop moving." Her breath caught. "I want you here," he said, quieter now. "Not just tonight. Not just sometimes. I want this to matter. I want us to matter." She looked down at the notebook in her hands. "I haven't let anyone read this," she admitted. "Not since college." He held out a hand. "Let me." She hesitated, then slowly extended the notebook. He took it, walked to the fireplace, and sat on the edge of a low leather armchair. She stood behind him, unsure whether to stay or give him space. But he opened the notebook and began reading aloud. The words tumbled out softly, at first her words raw and unpolished, written late at night when the noise in her head was too much to carry. Stories about women who couldn't let go. Men who didn't know how to ask for help. Children caught in the space between grief and hope. As he read, his voice never wavered. He didn't rush. He didn't skim. He absorbed. When he reached the end of the final page, he closed the notebook and looked up at her. "You're extraordinary," he said. She blinked, throat tight. "You don't have to say that." "I'm not." He stood. "You write the way people bleed when no one's watching. That's not something you can teach. That's something you are." Something inside her cracked, then softened. He stepped closer. "Come here." She didn't hesitate this time. As his arms wrapped around her, everything slowed. The tension, the fear, the doubt, it all ebbed as she leaned into him, forehead resting against his collarbone. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I," he murmured. "But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." She closed her eyes. "Grayson already sees you as someone important," he added. "But I want you to know this isn't just about him. It's you. Just you." She pulled back slightly, looking up at him. "What are you asking me, Sawyer?" "I'm asking you to stay." "In what way?" "In every way." She let the silence stretch, needing to feel the truth of it settle into her bones. Then finally, "Okay." His breath left him in a rush. Relief, raw and unfiltered, softened the tight line of his jaw. "I'm not going to pretend it'll be easy," she said. "I still have rent. I still have a contract with the district. And you have a life built around things I've never even imagined." "Then we'll build something new," he said. "Together." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. Somewhere nearby, a branch creaked under the weight of snow. But inside, all Natalie could hear was the sound of her pulse syncing with his. He tilted her chin up slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. When his lips met hers, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't some fevered collision. It was deliberate. Certain. A promise made without noise. When they parted, she whispered, "What about Grayson? He asked this morning if I thought you'd ever be a real part of our family." Her eyes filled. "And what did you say?" "I told him I hoped so." She laughed, wiping at her cheek. "Guess we're going to need more chocolate coins. I'll order a truck." She leaned back into him again, heart full. Later that week, she turned in her final sub-report. Mrs. Cartwright had recovered, and the district offered Natalie another temporary position at a middle school across town. But she declined. Instead, she accepted a new role one Sawyer created himself. Director of Educational Outreach for the Zane Foundation. Came with an office, a flexible schedule, and full freedom to write on the side. But what mattered more was that every afternoon she'd be finished in time to pick up Grayson from school. And every evening she came home to a man who looked at her like she was the only thing in his world that ever made sense. She had substituted for a sick teacher. But what she found was nothing short of extraordinary. She found a son who needed her, a man who saw her, and a life she never knew she was allowed to want until it was hers. Natalie glanced up from her laptop, the soft clacking of keys replaced by the distant splash of water outside. The late afternoon sun poured through the open balcony doors, casting warm streaks across the pale wooden floors of the Zane Foundation's coastal retreat, a space Sawyer had insisted she use whenever she needed to clear her head. Nestled on a bluff just north of the city, it was quiet, private, and impossibly beautiful, as if someone had carved a sanctuary into the earth just for her. Except it wasn't just for her. Not anymore. Grayson's laughter carried from the pool, followed by the unmistakable splash of Sawyer diving in after him. Natalie stood, stretching the tension from her shoulders, and wandered outside, barefoot on the stone path. She leaned against the railing and watched as father and son wrestled in the water, both beaming in a way that made her chest ache with something too full to name. Sawyer noticed her first. He pushed his wet hair off his forehead, eyes locking with hers. "You finished writing?" "For now," she called back. "I hit the part where the heroine forgives the man who kept pushing her away." Grayson paddled toward the edge. Did he finally tell her he was just scared? Natalie blinked. "You read it." Sawyer lifted Grayson out of the water and set him on the deck. "He found your printed pages on the kitchen island." "I thought we agreed no reading drafts without permission," she said, stepping closer. Grayson handed her a towel. "I only read the parts with the dog. But Dad read all of it. Twice." She looked at Sawyer. He shrugged. "It was on my desk. That technically counts as implied permission. That's not a thing." He grinned. "It should be." Grayson tugged on her hand. "Can we do S. Murray's tonight?" "If you eat something green first," she said. He groaned but nodded. "Fine. But only if I can put peanut butter on the celery." "Deal." He scampered inside, leaving a wet trail of footprints across the patio. Sawyer leaned against the railing beside her, water still dripping from his arms. "You've changed him." "He changed me first." He reached for her hand, threading their fingers together. "You know, I used to think I had everything figured out. The company, the foundation, Grayson's future. Everything was structured, controlled." She turned to him. "And now, I wake up every morning trying to be the kind of man you'd stay in love with." Her breath caught. "I never left it." He kissed her, then deep and slow, the kind of kiss that didn't need to prove anything. When it broke, she rested her forehead against his. "I sent my manuscript to a publisher last night." He pulled back slightly. "You didn't tell me. I wanted to see if I could do it without hiding behind you." His expression softened. You never needed to hide, Natalie. I did, until I didn't. He nodded, understanding threaded through every line of his face. What happens if they say no? I'll send it to another. And another. And another. I'm not afraid of no anymore. He brushed a damp strand of hair behind her ear. Good. Because one day someone's going to say yes and the world's going to realize what I already know, that you're a force. She laughed. You're biased. Utterly. Grayson reappeared at the sliding door, wearing dry clothes and holding a jar of marshmallows. I found the giant ones. Natalie turned to Sawyer. You did not buy the triple-size ones again. I may have accidentally clicked bulk order. Grayson disappeared again, leaving the door wide open behind him. Natalie glanced back at the pool, at the garden lights beginning to flicker on, at the life they'd somehow built without realizing it. You know, she said softly, I used to think love had to come with pain, that if it didn't hurt, it wasn't deep enough. And now I think love is the thing that lets you breathe again, even after everything else tried to suffocate you. He kissed her temple. That sounds like something someone should publish. I'm working on it. That night, they sat around the outdoor fire pit, wrapped in blankets with chocolate smudged on Grayson's cheek and the stars reflecting in the pool. Sawyer handed her a mug of tea and she leaned into his side, her hand resting on his chest. I've been thinking, he said. Dangerous. He smiled. I want to make this official. She turned her head. We're already official. No, I mean legal. Permanent. All the paperwork and signatures and embarrassing public vows. Her breath caught. You're serious? He reached into the blanket beside him and pulled out a small box, the firelight glinting off the edges. You're the only person who's ever made my life feel like mine again, he said, opening the box to reveal a ring unlike any she'd ever seen, simple, elegant, and undeniably hers. So, Natalie Anders, will you marry me? She stared at him, heart pounding. You know this is wildly impractical, she whispered. I've never wanted anything practical. She looked at Grayson, who was pretending not to eavesdrop and failing spectacularly. Then back at Sawyer. Yes, she said, her voice breaking. Absolutely yes. Grayson whooped, launching a marshmallow into the fire. Sawyer pulled her into his arms and kissed her like the world had stopped turning. It might as well have. The wedding took place 6 months later, not in a ballroom or a cathedral, but in the garden of the Zane Foundation's Education Center. Grayson walked her down the aisle, holding her hand like he'd done it his whole life. Sawyer waited beneath a canopy of white roses, his tie slightly crooked and his eyes never leaving hers. Their vows were whispered, not shouted. No promises of perfection, only of presence. Of choosing each other even when it was hard. Especially then. As they exchanged rings, the wind lifted the petals from the garden beds, scattering them like confetti. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Natalie stood on the terrace, her dress fluttering in the breeze, watching Grayson teach one of the flower girls how to twirl. Sawyer came up behind her, arms slipping around her waist. Mrs. Zane, he said against her neck. You're going to have to get used to Mrs. Anders Zane, she replied. I'll adjust. She smiled, turning to face him. You really did change everything. No, he said, brushing his thumb across her cheek. You just reminded me how to live it. They danced to no music, just the rhythm of the evening and the quiet laughter of people who'd once been strangers, now family. And when the stars appeared, they danced longer, because this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the life they'd fought to find. A life built not on wealth or legacy, but on something far rarer. A love that had nothing to prove, only everything to give.